The Discernment Field, Episode 15, Final Integration. To live with clarity inside the field. Hello, and welcome to the Discernment Field, a podcast on mind, behavior, perception, and the search for clarity in an emotionally reactive world. This is the final episode of the first series. Because this is a final integration, this episode will move differently from the others. We are not opening an entirely new subject in isolation. We are gathering the full map we have been building: perception, emotional activation, critical thinking, identity, nervous system state, game theory, control theory, influence architecture, status, attention, narrative, morality, belonging, and authority. Across this series, we have not simply been exploring separate topics. We have been tracing the many forces that shape what a person sees, feels, believes, defends, repeats, trusts, and becomes. And now, as we arrive at this final point, the question is no longer only, what shapes perception? The question becomes, how do we live with clarity inside the field? In the previous episode, we explored authority, expertise, and the manufacture of trust. We looked at why authority is necessary, why expertise matters, and why no human being can personally verify everything alone. But we also explored how trust can be manufactured through credentials, charisma, consensus, institutional legitimacy, rebellion, insider status, and emotional resonance. We asked who we trust to tell us what reality means, and whether that trust increases our agency or asks us to surrender perception. Now, episode 15 brings the whole first series together. Because once we understand how perception is shaped from every direction, the final question becomes, how do we remain awake without becoming cold? How do we question without becoming paranoid? How do we trust without surrendering? How do we belong without disappearing? How do we care without becoming morally possessed? How do we see influence without losing compassion for the human being inside it? That is the deeper challenge. Discernment is often misunderstood. Some people hear the word and think it means suspicion. They imagine discernment as seeing through everything, trusting nothing, exposing every motive, doubting every authority, resisting every frame, and standing permanently outside the world, as though distance itself proves clarity. But that is not discernment. That is often fear wearing the costume of intelligence. Discernment is not cynicism. Cynicism already knows what it wants to find. It assumes corruption before examination. It reduces trust to naivety, sincerity to performance, goodness to strategy, and hope to stupidity. Cynicism may protect the self from being fooled, but it can also imprison the self in a world where nothing is allowed to be real except manipulation. Discernment is not paranoia. Paranoia connects everything too quickly. It sees patterns, but it cannot always distinguish meaningful patterns from emotional projection. It may feel awake because it refuses the surface, but it can become trapped beneath the surface, endlessly searching for hidden hands until ordinary life can no longer breathe. Discernment is not intellectual superiority. It is not the feeling of being above the crowd, above emotion, above belonging, above authority, above morality, above story. That kind of position can become its own identity trap. The person who believes they see through everything may stop noticing what they are still inside. Discernment is not detachment from humanity. It is a deeper participation with clearer eyes. The field is everything that acts upon perception before perception calls itself truth. That is the line at the center of this finale. The field includes the body, emotion, memory, threat, shame, desire, identity, status, belonging, incentives, feedback loops, repetition, symbols, language, narrative, authority, trust, group pressure, digital attention, moral charge, social cost, the need to be loved, the need to be safe, the need to be right, the need to belong, the need to know. None of us stands outside these forces completely. The point is not to escape the field. The point is to become more conscious inside it. Because the field does not disappear when we become aware of it. We still have bodies. We still have emotions. We still need a connection. We still rely on others. We still tell stories. We still respond to status. We still seek meaning. We still trust some people more than others. We still make moral judgments. We still live in systems of reward and punishment. We still inhabit environments designed by others. We still use language that carries state. We still move through a world where attention is constantly being captured. So the aim is not purity. The aim is practice. This final episode should feel like a threshold. The first series ends here, but the work does not close. In fact, this ending opens the door to a second season, because once the foundations of discernment are mapped, the next movement can go deeper into the lived worlds where discernment is tested. Media, relationships, institutions, technology, education, health, spirituality, digital identity, artificial intelligence, social engineering, cultural conflict, family systems, public emotion, and the subtle ways modern reality trains the human being to react before they have had time to meet themselves. But before we move towards that second set of episodes, we need to gather what this first series has given us: a vocabulary, a map, a practice, a way of pausing before perception becomes possession. So in this final integration, we will ask, what is shaping my perception right now? What state am I in? What emotion is narrating this moment? What identity is being protected? What behavior is being reinforced? What has captured my attention? What story am I inside? What value am I defending? What belonging am I protecting? What authority am I trusting? And what would reality look like if the field loosened? That is where we begin. Part 1. What the discernment field is. The forces that shape perception, the discernment field, is the living environment of influence around and within the human being. It is not only outside us. It is not only media, propaganda, institutions, algorithms, status games, public narratives, or authority structures. It is also inside us, the body state, the emotional charge, the memories, the identity wounds, the need for belonging, the fear of shame, the desire for certainty, the role we are trying to protect, the story we are already living inside. This is why discernment begins when we stop treating perception as neutral and begin asking what has shaped it. That does not mean perception is useless. It does not mean everything we see is false. It does not mean reality is unreachable. It means we do not see from nowhere. We see through state, story, body, role, group, status, fiatus, trust, attention, language, and expectation. We do not simply receive reality, we interpret it. And very often, the interpretation begins before we have consciously chosen it. A comment is made, and the body tightens before the mind has formed a sentence. A headline appears, and attention locks onto the threat. A person with status speaks, and their words feel heavier than someone else's. A group reacts, and the shared emotion makes the reaction feel true. A story fits an old wound, and the present moment is pulled into the past. A trusted authority speaks, and questioning relaxes. A distrusted authority speaks, and suspicion appears before evidence is examined. This is the field. It is the total atmosphere in which perception forms. Episode 1 began with the foundation that perception is not a passive reception. We do not simply open our eyes and receive a clean copy of the world. Perception is interpretation. It is filtered, prioritized, emotionally charged, patterned, and predicted. The mind and body are always selecting what matters. Episode 2 brought emotion into that picture. Emotion is not the enemy of discernment. Emotion carries information. Fear may signal danger. Anger may signal violation. Shame may signal social exposure. Grief may signal loss. Disgust may signal contamination. Hope may signal possibility. But emotion can also narrow the field, distort proportion, assign meaning too quickly, and make certainty feel necessary. Episode 3 showed that critical thinking is not only logic. Logic matters, but logic operating inside a dysregulated state can become a servant of fear, pride, shame, or identity. A person can reason brilliantly from a false premise. They can gather evidence in defense of an emotional conclusion. They can use intelligence to protect a story rather than discover the truth. Episode 4 explored how identity captures intelligence. Once a belief becomes part of who we are, examining it can feel like self-harm. If I am the rational one, I may struggle to see where I am emotionally invested. If I am the compassionate one, I may struggle to see my own cruelty. If I am the awakened one, I may struggle to admit where I have become arrogant. If I am the harmed one, I may struggle to see my own agency. Identity not only shapes what we think, it shapes what we can afford to know. Episode 5 brought the nervous system fully into the map. When the body is in threat, perception narrows. When shame floods the system, visibility becomes danger. When collapse enters, possibility disappears. When urgency dominates, speed feels like truth. State changes the world before the mind explains why the world looks different. So the field begins beneath thought. This is essential. If we treat discernment as purely mental, we miss the body that is already interpreting before the mind has caught up. The question is not only, what do I think? The question is, what field is thinking through me? That question may sound unusual, but it is practical. If I am angry, anger may be thinking through me. If I am ashamed, shame may be thinking through me. If I am trying to protect status, status may be thinking through me. If I am afraid of losing belonging, the group may be thinking through me. If I am attached to being right, identity may be thinking through me. If I am under the spell of a narrative, the story may be thinking through me. If I have surrendered to an authority, borrowed certainty may be thinking through me. Discernment begins when we interrupt that automatic possession, not by suppressing the emotion, not by mocking the story, not by pretending we can become perfectly objective, but by creating enough inner space to ask, what is shaping this perception? What state am I in? What emotion is driving interpretation? What story am I inside? What identity is being protected? What would I see if my state changed? These questions do not instantly solve everything, but they open the field. They interrupt the false certainty that says, I am simply seeing what is real. Sometimes we see something real, but we are also seeing through something. That through matters. A person in fear sees danger more quickly. That may protect them. It may also make neutral signals look threatening. A person in shame sees judgment more quickly. That may help them repair a social rupture. It may also make every silence feel like rejection. A person in anger sees a violation more quickly. That may defend a boundary. It may also erase complexity. A person in hope sees possibilities more quickly. That may sustain courage. It may also make warning signs harder to feel. Discernment does not ask us to distrust every perception. It asks us to understand the conditions under which perception arises. This is why the field is both internal and external. The external world provides signals, but the internal state gives those signals meaning. A public message may be framed to create urgency, but the urgency lands differently in a regulated body than in a frightened one. A group may reward outrage, but outrage grips more strongly when the person already feels unseen or powerless. An authority may offer certainty, but certainty becomes more seductive when uncertainty feels unbearable. The field is relational. Outer design meets inner vulnerability. That is where influence happens. So the discernment field is not a theory outside life. It is the living space between body and world, between attention and meaning, between emotion and interpretation, between authority and trust, between belonging and conscience, between story and reality. To live with clarity inside the field is not to become untouchable. It is to become more interruptible by reality. That is the beginning of discernment, the humility to know that what feels obvious may still be shaped, and the courage to ask what becomes visible when the field is widened. Part 2: Emotion, State and the Body Before Belief. Why clarity begins below thought if the discernment field begins beneath thought. Then we have to return to one of the foundational lessons of this whole series. Clarity is not only cognitive. It is embodied. We often imagine belief as something that begins in the mind. We think we see information, consider it, evaluate it, and then decide what we believe. Sometimes that is partly true. But very often, before belief becomes conscious, the body has already moved. It has moved towards a threat, towards defense, towards shame, towards withdrawal, towards urgency, towards collapse, towards attachment, towards certainty, towards a familiar story. The body does not wait for a full argument before it begins preparing us to respond. It reads tone, timing, facial expression, implication, social danger, group reaction, authority signals, and previous memory. It scans for safety and threat beneath conscious reasoning. It prepares the system before we name what is happening. This is why discernment cannot only be the act of thinking harder. Sometimes the mind is already thinking inside a body that has narrowed the field. Fear is one of the clearest examples. Fear sharpens attention. It pulls the mind towards danger. It prioritizes survival over nuance. It asks, what could go wrong? Where is the threat? What must be avoided? Who is unsafe? What do I need to do now? Fear can be intelligent. It may detect danger before conscious thought has fully caught up. It can protect us. It can wake us from naivety. It can stop us from ignoring signs that something is wrong. But fear also narrows perception. It makes the threat more visible than the context. It can make uncertainty feel unbearable. It can make speed feel necessary. It can make control feel like wisdom. It can make suspicion feel like discernment. A fearful body may not ask, what is true? It may ask, what explanation makes me feel prepared? That is an important difference. A dysregulated body can mistake urgency for truth. When fear is high, the interpretation that gives the body a clear enemy, a clear cause, a clear danger, or a clear plan may feel more truthful than the interpretation that asks for patience. The body wants resolution. It wants to know where to place energy. It wants to move. This is why public fear is so powerful. A frightened population becomes easier to direct. A frightened group becomes easier to synchronize. A frightened individual becomes more likely to trust anyone who can organize the threat into a story. But fear is not the only state that shapes perception. Shame has its own field. Shame turns attention inward and outward at the same time. Inward towards the exposed self, outward towards the eyes of others. It asks, how am I being seen? What have I become in their eyes? Am I still acceptable? Am I contaminated? Am I foolish? Am I bad? Am I about to be rejected? When shame enters, reality becomes social. The person may not be evaluating what is true. They may be evaluating what protects them from humiliation. Shame can make correction feel like annihilation. It can make an apology feel like a collapse. It can make disagreement feel like exposure. It can make a simple mistake feel like identity. In shame, the self often wants to hide, defend, attack, explain, justify, disappear, or regain status. This matters because many beliefs are protected by shame avoidance. A person may refuse to update not because they have strong evidence, but because being wrong would feel unbearable. A group may refuse accountability not because the criticism is false, but because the group's clean identity would be contaminated. Shame hides reality by making truth feel socially dangerous. Anger shapes perception differently. Anger often says, a boundary has been crossed. It can restore energy where fear collapses. It can help people speak after a silence. It can name violation. It can resist injustice. It can protect dignity. In that sense, anger can be a force of truth. But anger can also collapse complexity. It can make the target too simple. It can convert discomfort into accusation. It can seek confirmation rather than understanding. It can confuse intensity with accuracy. It can make contempt feel earned. Anger sees the line, but it may not always see the whole field. So the discerning question is not, should I be angry? Sometimes anger is appropriate. The question is, what is this anger helping me see, and what is it preventing me from seeing? Disgust is similar. Disgust can warn against violation, corruption, betrayal, or contamination. It can appear when something feels deeply wrong. But disgust can also dehumanize. It can make another person or group feel untouchable, polluted, or beneath concern. Once disgust enters a moral field, cruelty can begin to feel clean. The target is no longer merely wrong. They are contaminating. They must be removed, mocked, exposed, purified, and excluded. Disgust can protect boundaries. It can also prepare for dehumanization. Hope, too, shapes perception. Hope sustains. It keeps people moving through uncertainty. It helps a person imagine that something different is possible. Without hope, discernment can become sterile. It may see problems clearly but lose the energy to live. But hope can also seduce. It can make warning signs feel negative. It can make criticism feel like sabotage. It can make a leader, method, movement, relationship, or promise feel more trustworthy than it has earned. Hope can become a state in which possibility is treated as proof. When we desperately need something to be true, the body may soften towards whatever says it is. This is why discernment must include the question, Am I perceiving from hope or from evidence? And can I hold hope without letting it blind me? Grief also shapes the field. Grief turns perception towards loss. It asks what has gone, what cannot be restored, what has changed, and what mattered. Grief can deepen us. It can make us more honest. It can strip illusion. But grief can also make the future feel closed. It can make a new life feel like betrayal. It can make an old wound become the organizing story of everything that follows. A grieving body may not be able to see the possibility yet. That does not mean possibility is false. It means the body is still living in the loss. This is why regulation matters. Regulation does not mean being calm all the time. It does not mean suppressing emotion. It does not mean becoming detached, polite, emotionally flat, or unaffected. Regulation means having enough capacity to feel without being entirely possessed by the feeling. It means the body can experience emotion and still leave room for perception. Regulation creates space, not certainty. Space. A regulated person can still be angry, but not consumed by anger. They can still be afraid, but not ruled by fear. They can still feel shame, but not become ashamed. They can still hope, but not surrender discernment to hope. They can still grieve, but not let grief decide the whole future. This is why clarity begins below thought. Before asking, what is true, sometimes we need to ask, am I regulated enough to perceive? That question is not avoidance, it is preparation. If I am activated, I may need to pause before concluding. If I am flooded with fear, I may need more time before trusting the threat narrative. If I am ashamed, I may need to separate correction from identity. If I am angry, I may need to honor the boundary while widening the field. If I am hopeful, I may need to test the promise without killing the hope. If I am disgusted, I may need to remember the humanity of the person or group I am judging. This does not mean we wait forever. Some situations require action. Some boundaries must be set quickly. Some dangers are real. But even then, regulation helps us act more cleanly. It helps us distinguish between response and discharge. A response belongs to reality. A discharge belongs to the state. When the body is highly activated, it may want to discharge energy and then call the discharge truth, justice, protection, honesty, or discernment. But the body's need to discharge is not always the same as the situation's need for action. This is why the body before belief matters for everything else in the series. Identity becomes more rigid when the body feels threatened. Status becomes more important when shame is near. Narratives become more total when uncertainty is unbearable. Moral certainty becomes more attractive when ambiguity dysregulates the body. Belonging becomes harder to question when exile feels like danger. Authority becomes more seductive when the body wants someone else to hold the complexity. Attention becomes easier to capture when emotion is already activated. A dysregulated body is not stupid, it is trying to survive. But survival perception is not the whole truth. So the practice is not to attack the body. It is to listen to it carefully. The body may be telling us something important. It may be saying, this is dangerous, this is familiar, this feels like shame, this reminds me of an old wound, this person's tone does not feel safe, this group is asking too much, this authority feels controlling, this narrative is pulling me too fast. The body gives signals, discernment interprets them. The body should not be ignored. But it should not always be obeyed immediately. This is where the pause becomes sacred. Not sacred in a religious sense, necessarily, but sacred as the small space where possession becomes relationship. In the pause I can say, fear is here, but fear is not the whole field. Anger is here, but anger is not the whole field. Shame is here, but shame is not the whole self. Hope is here, but hope is not proof. Urgency is here, but urgency is not automatically the truth. This pause returns agency. It allows the person to ask, what is my body preparing me to do? Attack, withdraw, appease, prove, punish, hide, obey, expose, control, chase, collapse. Then the next question, is that response appropriate to the present reality, or is it being shaped by state, memory, identity, or group pressure? This is not easy work. It requires humility, because many of us are attached to our activated interpretations. They feel real. They feel urgent. They often come with evidence. And sometimes they are right. But the fact that an interpretation feels immediate does not mean it is complete. Discernment asks us to widen before we harden. So in this final integration, we return to a simple anchor. Clarity is not only a thought process, it is a state capacity. The clearer body does not guarantee truth, but it gives truth more room to arrive. The regulated nervous system does not make us immune to influence, but it makes us less easily captured by urgency, shame, fear, status, and emotional contagion. The person who can pause has more choices than the person who must react. And that may be the beginning of living clearly inside the field, not escaping emotion, not becoming cold, not distrusting the body, but learning to meet the body as the first interpreter, and then asking whether its interpretation is wide enough to carry reality. Part 3: Identity, Status, and the Need to Be Someone. When the self protects the story, if emotion and nervous system state shape the field before thought, then identity and status shape what we are willing to let thought discover. This is one of the most difficult layers of discernment, because identity does not feel like a lens. It feels like self. It does not always announce itself as belief, role, status, wound, image, or performance. It often arrives as a simple feeling of this is who I am, or this is who I must not be, or this is what people must see in me, or this is what I cannot afford to lose. And once identity becomes involved, truth becomes more expensive. A belief is easier to examine when it is just an idea. It becomes harder to examine when the belief protects dignity, belonging, status, moral worth, intelligence, strength, innocence, victimhood, spiritual identity, political identity, professional identity, family identity, or the sense of being someone coherent in the world. This is why the question is not only, what do I believe? It is, who do I become if this belief changes? That question moves deeper, because many beliefs are not held only because they are true. They are held because they preserve a role. They hold a self-image together. They protect a wound from being touched. They preserve rank in a group. They prevent shame from entering. They maintain the story that allows the person to feel stable, good, strong, aware, special, rational, loyal, ethical, independent, or safe. The more a belief protects identity or status, the harder it becomes to examine. This is why intelligence alone cannot save us. A highly intelligent person can still use that intelligence to defend the role they cannot afford to lose. They can gather arguments, interpret evidence, challenge others, explain themselves, and build complex justifications around a self-image that remains unexamined. The reasoning may be sophisticated, but the function is protective. The mind becomes a lawyer for the identity. Episode 4 explored this as identity capture. Identity captures intelligence when the self-image becomes more important than reality. Once that happens, the person is no longer simply asking, what is true? They are also asking, usually beneath awareness, what truth can I survive? What truth would make me feel ashamed? What truth would make me lose my place? What truth would destroy the role I've been playing? A person whose identity is the rational one may struggle to recognize emotional investment. They may speak in calm language, analyze others, quote evidence, and pride themselves on objectivity. But if someone points out that their reasoning is protecting pride, fear, resentment, or status, they may resist strongly. Not because the observation is necessarily false, but because it threatens the role. If they are emotionally invested, then they are not only rational. The clean self-image is disturbed. A person whose identity is the compassionate one may struggle to see their own contempt. They may genuinely care about suffering, justice, fairness, and harm. But if they treat certain people as disposable, mock those outside the circle, or use care language to control others, they may not register the contradiction. To see it would threaten the identity of being compassionate. So the behavior is reinterpreted. It is not contempt, it is accountability. It is not controlled, it is safe. It is not cruelty, it is protection. A person whose identity is the awakened one may struggle to admit confusion. They may have genuinely seen through certain illusions. They may have questioned narratives that others accepted. They may have broken free from conditioning. But if awakening becomes identity, then being wrong feels like falling asleep again. Doubt becomes dangerous. Humility becomes difficult. Disagreement from others becomes evidence that others are less awake, rather than an invitation to examine the claim. A person whose identity is the harmed one may struggle to see their own agency. The harm may be real. The wound may deserve recognition. The story may have restored dignity after years of silence, but if the wound becomes the whole identity, then responsibility can feel like invalidation. Any suggestion that the person has choices now may feel like minimizing what happened then. The role protects the wound, but it may also prevent movement. A person whose identity is the strong one may struggle to receive help. They may have become strong because life required it. They may have survived what others do not know. But if strength becomes identity, softness can feel like humiliation. Rest can feel like failure. Need can feel like danger. The role that once preserved the self begins to trap the self inside performance. A person whose identity is the truth teller may struggle to notice when truth is being used as a weapon. They may have spent years naming what others denied. They may have paid a price for honesty. But if truth-telling becomes identity, then confrontation itself can become addictive. The person may begin to need something to express to remain who they are. They may mistake intensity for honesty and disruption for clarity. This is the paradox of identity. Many roles begin as adaptations. They may have been necessary. They may have protected the person. They may have restored dignity. They may contain genuine truth. The problem is not that the role exists. The problem is when the role becomes too sacred to update. Discernment requires enough inner security to lose a role without losing the self. That is one of the core lines of this part. Because if I cannot lose the role, I cannot fully examine reality. If I must always remain the rational one, the good one, the awakened one, the strong one, the victim, the rescuer, the outsider, the rebel, the safe person, the intelligent one, the misunderstood one, or the one who sees, then perception will bend around that need. This is where status enters. Status is not only wealth, fame, beauty, or formal rank. Status is whatever gives a person social value in a particular field. In some fields, confidence gives status. In others, credentials. In others, calmness. In others, suffering. In others, moral purity. In others, rebellion. In others, productivity. In others, spiritual language. In others, beauty. In others, victimhood. In others, toughness. In others, intellectual sharpness. In others, proximity to power. Every field has currencies. Episode 9 explored this through status games and social hierarchies. Status shapes whose voice matters, whose mistakes are excused, whose pain is believed, whose confidence becomes authority, whose suffering becomes moral rank, whose beauty becomes credibility, whose calmness becomes maturity, whose popularity becomes proof, and whose disagreement becomes a threat. In the discernment field, status matters because people often defend positions that give them rank. If being the most informed person gives me status, I may resist admitting I do not know. If being the most moral person gives me status, I may resist seeing my shadow. If being a rebel gives me status, I may resist any evidence that the mainstream might be right about something. If being the victim gives me status, I may resist agency. If being the healer gives me status, I may resist accountability for harm. If being a skeptic gives me status, I may resist trusting anything. If being the calm one gives me status, I may suppress anger and call it wisdom. Status can quietly decide what truth is affordable. That is why the discerning person asks, what status do I gain from this position? This is not a cynical question. It does not mean every belief is only status-seeking. Many beliefs are sincere. Many positions are grounded in evidence, experience, conscience, or careful reflection. But sincerity does not remove status effects. A person can sincerely believe something and also gain status from believing it. If my group rewards outrage, outrage may become part of my status. If my group rewards nuance, nuance may be part of my status. If my group rewards certainty, certainty may become part of my status. If my group rewards being traumatized, healed, awakened, rational, rebellious, compassionate, successful, anti-mainstream, pro-sciential, detached, disciplined, or morally pure, then those identities become attractive places to stand. Again, this does not automatically make them false. It means the field is rewarding them. And what the field rewards, people tend to repeat. Status also affects shame. The higher the status attached to a role, the more shame threatens when that role is questioned. A public intellectual may find it difficult to say, I was wrong, because their status depends on being insightful. A spiritual teacher may find it difficult to say, I acted from ego, because their status depends on being beyond ego. A moral activist may find it difficult to say, I was cruel, because their status depends on defending compassion or justice. A leader may find it difficult to say, I do not know, because leadership status often depends on certainty. This is why another discernment question matters. What shame would I have to feel if I were wrong? Would I have to feel foolish? Would I have to feel ordinary? Would I have to feel manipulated? Would I have to feel guilty? Would I have to feel grief for time spent inside the wrong story? Would I have to admit that people I dismissed had a point? Would I have to apologize? Would I have to lose the admiration of a group? Would I have to release a role that made me feel safe? Many people do not avoid the truth because they hate the truth. They avoid the shame that truth would bring. That is human. But if shame decides what we can know, discernment becomes impossible. This is where inner security becomes essential, not ego security, not rigid confidence, not the performance of being unshakable, but the deeper security that says, I can be wrong and still exist. I can be corrected and still have dignity. I can lose status and still be whole. I can admit complexity without disappearing. I can change my mind without becoming nothing. Without that security, every challenge becomes a threat to the self. With that security, reality can interrupt us without destroying us. This is one of the main differences between ego-defended intelligence and living discernment. Ego-defended intelligence must protect the role. Living discernment can let the role soften. Ego-defended intelligence argues to preserve self-image. Living discernment asks what is real, even if the answer is inconvenient. Ego-defended intelligence wants to win. Living discernment wants to become more honest. This is not easy, because identity is often formed around pain. The roles we defend are not random. The strong one became strong because weakness was unsafe. The rational one became rational because chaos was dangerous. The truth-teller became a truth-teller because lies caused harm. The rescuer became a rescuer because care was tied to survival. The outsider became an outsider because belonging was conditional. The awakened one became awakened because they escaped something. The skeptic became skeptical because trust was abused. So we do not shame the role. We honor what it protected. But then we ask whether it still needs to govern perception. The role may have helped us survive, but it may not be large enough for clarity. If the strong one never receives, the role has a narrowed life. If the rational one never feels, the role has a narrowed perception. If the truth-teller never listens, the role has a narrowed relationship. If the victim never becomes agentic, the role has narrowed the future. If the skeptic never trusts, the role has a narrowed possibility. If the awakened one never doubts, the role has narrowed humility. Discernment is not role destruction. It is role integration. It allows the strong one to become soft when softness is real. It allows the rational one to include emotion without losing thought. It allows the truth-teller to speak with care. It allows the harmed one to reclaim agency without denying harm. It allows the rebel to recognize truth even when it comes from an unexpected place. It allows the compassionate one to face their own cruelty. It allows the safe person to admit where they have control. This is how identity becomes flexible enough for reality. A flexible identity can be updated. A rigid identity must be defended, and when identity becomes rigid inside a group, the difficulty multiplies. Now the person is not only protecting the private self, they are protecting their place in a social world. If they change their view, they may lose belonging. If they admit the group was wrong, they may lose status. If they question the shared story, they may become suspect. If they stop performing the role, the group may not know how to relate to them. This is why status and belonging are intertwined. A person may remain loyal to a belief, because the belief keeps them inside a group where they have a rank. They may not consciously think this. They may experience it as conviction. But beneath the conviction may be fear. If I stop believing this, who will I be to these people? If I stop saying this, will they still recognize me? If I stop opposing the enemy, will I still belong? If I stop playing the role, will anyone know me? Identity asks for continuity, status asks for recognition, belonging asks for connection, truth asks for openness. These needs can conflict. Discernment is the capacity to notice the conflict rather than letting one's need pretend to be the truth. This is especially important in the final episode because the entire series has been about forces that shape perception. Identity and status are among the most intimate forces because they do not feel like external influences. They feel like us. But the self can also be a field. The self can contain inherited stories, social roles, wounds, status currencies, shame defenses, moral identities, group scripts, and nervous system adaptations. So when we ask, what is shaping my perception? We must include the self-image. Am I seeing clearly or seeing in a way that preserves who I need to be? Am I seeking truth or defending a self-image? Am I asking this question because it matters, or because this question protects my role? Am I refusing that evidence because it is weak, or because it humiliates me? Am I calling this discernment because it is clear, or because it gives me status as the one who sees? These questions are not comfortable, but they are freeing. They loosen the grip of identity on perception. They remind us that the self can survive being updated, and this may be one of the deepest acts of discernment, to let reality change who we think we are, not in a chaotic way, not by surrendering identity to every influence, but by allowing the self to remain alive enough to grow, correct, grieve, apologize, reconsider, soften, strengthen, and become more whole. A person who cannot change their mind is often protecting themselves. A person who cannot apologize is often protecting themselves. A person who cannot see their group's harm is often protecting themselves. A person who cannot recognize the humanity of an enemy is often protecting a self. A person who cannot release a wound story may be protecting the self that survived through it. Discernment does not attack that self. It brings compassion to it, but it also asks whether protection has become prison. So as we gather this layer into the final map, the lesson is clear. Perception is shaped by identity and status, because the human being is not only a thinking machine. The human being is a self trying to remain coherent, dignified, recognized, and connected. That is why clarity requires more than information. It requires the courage to let a role loosen, the humility to lose rank, the strength to feel shame without making shame the ruler, the maturity to be wrong without becoming nothing, and the willingness to ask, again and again, who am I trying to be right now? And what would I see if I did not need to protect that identity? Part 4: Incentives, Feedback Loops, and Behavioral Training. How systems teach people what to become if identity and status shape what we can afford to see. Incentives and feedback loops shape what we are trained to do. This is where the series moved from the inner architecture of perception into the behavioral architecture of systems. Because people are not shaped by ideas alone. They are shaped by what is rewarded, what is punished, what is ignored, what is amplified, what is made costly, what is made easy, and what is repeated until it becomes normal. A person may say they value honesty, but if honesty is punished every time it appears, they may learn silence. A workplace may say it values well-being, but if overwork is rewarded and boundaries are punished, people will learn exhaustion. A family may say it values closeness, but if truth creates conflict and performance creates peace, children learn performance. A platform may say it values connection, but if outrage, beauty, certainty, conflict, and speed receive the most attention, users learn to become more reactive, polished, extreme, and immediate. A group may say it values discernment, but if nuance lowers status and loyalty raises it, members learn the emotional shape of belonging. This is why the question is not only, what does this system say it values? The deeper question is, what does it reward? Because the reward often tells the truth more clearly than the stated value. Episode 6 explored this through game theory. Game theory helps us understand strategic behavior, incentives, cooperation, trust, signaling, reputation, hidden motives, and the way people often behave differently when the structure around them changes. People may not be acting from pure malice, pure stupidity, or pure sincerity. They may be responding to the game they are inside. The game tells people what pays, not only financially, socially, emotionally, reputationally, morally, relationally. If outrage pays, outrage grows. If calmness pays, calmness grows. If victimhood pays, victimhood grows. If confidence pays, confidence grows. If beauty pays, beauty is performed. If certainty pays, doubt is hidden. If loyalty pays, conscience becomes expensive. If obedience pays, independence becomes risky. If public humiliation pays, accountability becomes theater. If complexity costs too much, people simplify themselves. This is not about reducing human beings to machines. People have conscience, choice, agency, dignity, and the capacity to resist incentives. But incentives create pressure. They shape the field. They tell people what kind of behavior receives oxygen and what kind of behavior struggles to survive. A system does not need to command behavior if it can train the rewards and punishments around behavior. That line sits at the center of this part. Because many systems do not control people by saying, you must become this. They control through consequences, through repetition, through subtle feedback, through what gets liked, promoted, paid, praised, protected, ignored, mocked, demoted, removed, or socially punished. Over time, people learn. They may not even know they are learning. A child learns that being quiet keeps the household stable. A worker learns that replying after hours makes them look committed. A creator learns that conflict grows the audience faster than careful thought. A student learns that repeating approved language earns better treatment than original questioning. A group member learns that moral intensity brings belonging. A public figure learns that admitting uncertainty loses attention. A person in a relationship learns that expressing a need leads to withdrawal, so they stop needing to speak out. This is behavioral training, and it does not always require a conscious trainer. Sometimes the system trains because of the way feedback is arranged. Episode 7 explored this through control theory. Control theory shows how behavior becomes patterned through feedback: reward, punishment, correction, amplification, suppression, stabilization, and self-regulation. A system keeps itself stable by encouraging some behaviors and correcting others. Over time, the person may internalize the loop. They begin correcting themselves before anyone else has to. That is one of the most important insights in the whole series. Control is not always direct. Often, control becomes internal. At first, someone else punishes the behavior, then the group disapproves, then the person anticipates disapproval, then the person edits themselves before speaking. Eventually, the outside correction becomes an inner voice. The person says, "I probably should not say that. That will not go down well. That will make me look difficult. They will think I am disloyal. It is safer to leave it." The system no longer has to intervene. The person has become trained. This is how many families operate. A family may never explicitly say, "Do not tell the truth," but every time a truth is spoken, the room tightens. Someone gets upset. Someone withdraws. Someone accuses the speaker of being dramatic. Someone says, "Why bring this up now?" Someone becomes ill, angry, silent, or wounded. The message is learned. Truth destabilizes belonging. So the child learns to manage the emotional field. They learn to scan, to soften, to leave things unsaid, to become humorous instead of honest, helpful instead of needy, strong instead of vulnerable, grateful instead of angry. They may carry this training into adulthood and mistake it for personality. "I am just easygoing. I do not like conflict. I do not need much. I prefer to keep the peace." But sometimes personality is a system remembered by the body. The same happens in workplaces. A workplace may not say, "We reward burnout." It may even say the opposite. It may have well-being posters, policy documents, team-building sessions, and language about balance. But if the person who works late gets promoted, if the person who answers instantly gets praised, if the person who sets boundaries gets excluded from opportunity, if the person who challenges unrealistic demands is called negative, then the loop teaches the real value. The real value is availability. The real value is compliance. The real value is performance under pressure. People learn what the system actually rewards. Then they begin regulating themselves. They check emails late. They hide tiredness. They treat rest as guilt. They perform with enthusiasm. They do not use all their leave. They say yes before they have checked their capacity. The system has trained the body. This is why discernment cannot stop at values. It has to look at loops. To understand behavior, ask what the loop is rewarding. That question changes how we interpret people. Instead of only asking, "Why is this person like this?" we also ask, "What environment trained this behavior? What reward keeps it alive? What punishment makes alternatives costly?" A person who performs certainty may be in a field that punishes uncertainty. A person who is constantly reactive may be in a field that rewards emotional intensity. A person who exaggerates suffering may be in a field where suffering earns recognition. A person who speaks harshly may be in a field where gentleness is ignored. A person who flatters authority may be in a field where proximity to authority creates safety. A person who avoids truth may be in a field where truth leads to exile. This does not remove responsibility. Behavior still matters. Harm still matters. But it deepens the analysis. It asks what game is operating and what feedback loop is maintaining it. Game theory and control theory together give us a powerful lens. Game theory asks, what incentives shape the strategy? What does the person gain? What do they risk? What is being signaled? What is being rewarded? What is being punished? Is cooperation possible? What happens if someone refuses to play? Control theory asks, what loop keeps this behavior stable? What feedback corrects deviations? What behavior is amplified? What behavior is suppressed? Who benefits from the pattern? What would interrupt it? What new feedback would create change? Together, they show that behavior often survives because the environment keeps paying it. If dishonesty pays, dishonesty survives. If manipulation pays, manipulation survives. If silence pays, silence survives. If performance pays, performance survives. If outrage pays, outrage survives. If dependency pays, dependency survives. If moral purity pays, moral performance survives. If sincere complexity receives no reward, sincere complexity becomes rare. This is one reason modern digital environments are so important. Social platforms are not neutral containers. They are feedback systems. They reward certain behaviors with visibility, approval, attention, followers, comments, shares, status, outrage, and sometimes money. They punish other behaviors with invisibility, boredom, misunderstanding, slow growth, or social attack. The platform does not need to tell people, become more extreme. It only needs to reward extremity. It does not need to tell people, simplify your thoughts. It only needs to reward short, emotionally charged, easily shareable statements. It does not need to tell people, turn pain into performance. It only needs to reward public vulnerability in ways that convert suffering into visibility. Over time, the human being adapts. They learn what gets seen, and in an attention economy, what gets seen can become what feels real. This is not only an online problem. Digital systems simply reveal the mechanism at high speed. Families, schools, workplaces, religious communities, political groups, friendship circles, media ecosystems, and institutions all contain reward and punishment structures. They all teach people what is safe, valuable, visible, risky, shameful, admirable, or unacceptable. The question becomes, what kind of human being does this system train people to become? That question is more revealing than asking what the system claims to be. A school may claim to educate, but does it train curiosity or compliance? A workplace may claim to value innovation, but does it train creativity or risk avoidance? A family may claim to value love, but does it train authenticity or emotional management? A community may claim to value truth, but does it train inquiry or loyalty? A platform may claim to connect people, but does it train presence or compulsion? A political movement may claim to value justice, but does it train repair or punishment? A spiritual group may claim to value awakening, but does it train humility or superiority? The trained behavior reveals the system. This matters because many people blame themselves for adaptations that were trained into them. They say, why am I like this? Why do I keep pleasing? Why do I avoid conflict? Why do I feel guilty resting? Why do I need validation? Why do I over-explain? Why do I perform competence? Why do I fear asking questions? Why do I become tense around authority? Sometimes the answer is not a flaw. Sometimes the answer is a loop. A behavior that looks irrational may have once been highly intelligent inside a particular system. People-pleasing may have protected belonging. Silence may have prevented punishment. Overwork may have gained approval. Hypervigilance may have detected danger. Emotional self-erasure may have maintained a connection. Perfectionism may have reduced criticism. Rebellion may have protected dignity. The behavior made sense in the game it learned. But once the person leaves that game, the behavior may keep running. That is why discernment includes the question, what loop am I still living inside even though the environment has changed? Am I still responding to old family feedback, old school feedback, old relationship feedback, old workplace feedback, old shame feedback, old group belonging feedback, old status feedback? The external system may be gone, but the internalized loop continues. This is where behavioral freedom begins, not by simply forcing ourselves to change, but by noticing the reward and punishment structure the body still expects. If I speak truth, what does my body expect will happen? If I rest, what does my body expect will happen? If I disagree, what does my body expect will happen? If I stop performing, what does my body expect will happen? If I refuse the game, what does my body expect will happen? Sometimes the body expects exile where no exile is coming. Sometimes it expects punishment where no punishment is coming. Sometimes it expects shame because shame was the old correction mechanism. To change behavior, we often need new feedback. The body has to learn that honesty can survive. Boundaries can survive. Rest can survive. Disagreement can survive. Imperfection can survive. Need can survive. Silence from others does not always mean danger. Conflict does not always mean abandonment. Authority does not always mean domination. Attention does not always mean safety. Rejection does not always mean annihilation. New feedback rewrites the loop. This is also how systems can change. If a workplace says it values boundaries, it must reward boundaries. If a family says it wants honesty, it must stop punishing truth. If a group says it values discernment, it must make questions safe. If a platform wants healthier discourse, it must stop rewarding the most reactive behavior. If a public institution wants trust, it must reward transparency rather than image protection. Statements do not change systems. Feedback changes systems. This is why the discerning person learns to ask, what behavior is being reinforced? What behavior is being suppressed? Who benefits from this pattern? What happens when someone interrupts the loop? What new feedback would change the system? These questions are practical because they move us beyond moral judgment alone. Instead of only saying people should be better, we ask, what structure is training this behavior? Instead of only saying, why do people keep doing this? We ask, where is the reward? Instead of only blaming individuals, we examine the game, the loop, the status economy, the punishment pattern, and the pathway of least resistance. Again, this does not erase agency. People can resist incentives. They can act with conscience. They can interrupt loops. They can choose integrity over reward. But we should not underestimate the power of repeated feedback. If a system rewards harmful behavior long enough, harmful behavior becomes normal. If a system punishes honest behavior long enough, honesty becomes rare. Discernment is the art of seeing both the person and the pattern, the individual choice and the system training it, the declared value and the actual reward, the behavior and the loop that keeps reproducing it. This is essential for the final map of the series, because influence is not only about persuading people with arguments. Much of influence happens beneath argument, through repeated interaction with systems that train us what to expect, what to fear, what to seek, what to hide, what to perform, and what to become. A person may think they are freely choosing, while their behavior has been shaped by years of reward and punishment. A group may think it values truth, while its feedback loop rewards loyalty. A platform may claim neutrality, while its design rewards compulsion. A culture may celebrate authenticity while punishing anyone who becomes too honest. So the question becomes, where am I being trained? By whom? Through what rewards? Through what punishments? Towards what version of myself? And what would it take to interrupt the loop? That interruption is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is one honest sentence in a family that rewards silence. One boundary in a workplace is that it rewards availability. One refusal to join outrage in a group that rewards moral intensity. One slower thought on a platform that rewards speed. One admission of uncertainty in a field that rewards certainty. One act of rest in a culture that rewards exhaustion. Small interruptions matter because they introduce new feedback. They tell the system, another response is possible. They tell the body, survival is possible outside the old loop. They tell the field, not everyone will keep playing the same game. That is where behavioral discernment becomes agency. Not total control, not purity, not escape from all incentives, but the ability to see the loop before becoming its automatic output. Because once we can see what the field rewards, we can begin asking whether the reward is worth the self it is training us to become. Part 5: Influence Architecture and the Marketplace of Attention. How the field designs what we notice, if incentives and feedback loops teach people what to become. Influence architecture shapes what people notice before they even know they are being trained. This is where the field becomes environmental. Influence is not only persuasion. It is not only someone making an argument, presenting evidence, giving a speech, selling an idea, or trying to convince another person directly. Influence often begins earlier than that. It begins in the arrangement of the field itself, the frame, the atmosphere, the symbols, the pathway, the timing, the repetition, the authority cues, the emotional priming, the social proof, the default option, the architecture of attention. By the time an argument arrives, the field may already have prepared the body to receive it in a certain way. That was the central movement of Episode 8, Influence is Architecture. It is the design of the field in which perception takes place. A room can influence before anyone speaks. A website can influence before anyone reads. A headline can influence before anyone examines the article. A uniform can influence before anyone evaluates the person wearing it. A crowd reaction can influence before anyone checks the evidence. A color, symbol, image, slogan, ritual, label, layout, or repeated phrase can shape emotional readiness before conscious thought has fully formed. This is why influence is so subtle. We often notice the message, but not the arrangement that made the message feel obvious. A person may think they freely chose an opinion, but the frame has already told them what kind of thing they are looking at. A policy is framed as safety, so questions feel irresponsible. A product is framed as wellness, so purchasing feels like self-care. A conflict is framed as good versus evil, so complexity feels like betrayal. A group is framed as compassionate, so its control feels protective. A leader is framed as brave, so their recklessness feels courageous. A change is framed as progress, so caution feels backward. A restriction is framed as protection, so obedience feels ethical. The frame decides the first emotional meaning. Once that emotional meaning is set, the mind often reasons within it. This is why the discerning person asks, what field am I inside? Not only what is being said, but how has this situation been arranged so that one interpretation feels more natural than another? This applies everywhere. In public communication, the imagery, tone, chosen experts, selected statistics, moral language, and repeated phrases create a field of meaning. In a shop, product placement, lighting, price anchoring, packaging, and scarcity cues shape desire. In digital spaces, notifications, feeds, likes, previews, thumbnails, short-form clips, and algorithmic repetition shape attention. In institutions, titles, procedures, formal language, rooms, and hierarchies shape credibility. In relationships, timing, tone, silence, affection, withdrawal, and emotional pacing shape what feels safe to say. Influence architecture does not force us. It guides the path. It makes some responses easier than others. That is often enough. Because human beings tend to follow the path that is most emotionally available, socially rewarded, cognitively simple, or immediately relieving. The field does not need to remove all alternatives. It only needs to make one pathway feel natural, and the others feel costly, confusing, shameful, unsafe, or inconvenient. This connects directly to attention. Episode 10 explored attention as the marketplace. Attention is the gateway to perception. What captures attention shapes what feels real, urgent, desirable, threatening, moral, and possible. This may be one of the most important insights of the modern world. Reality is partly built from what attention repeatedly returns to. If my attention returns constantly to threat, the world begins to feel threatening. If it returns constantly to outrage, the world begins to feel morally enraged. If it returns constantly to comparison, the self begins to feel inadequate. If it returns constantly to crisis, the future begins to feel unstable. If it returns constantly to beauty, success, status, conflict, scandal, corruption, desire, collapse, or rescue, those things become emotionally enlarged. Attention does not merely observe reality. It feeds reality inside the nervous system. Whatever repeatedly captures attention begins to build reality. This does not mean attention invents the world from nothing. Real dangers exist. Real injustices exist. Real beauty exists. Real corruption exists. Real progress exists. Real suffering exists. But attention determines what becomes dominant in perception. It gives weight. It gives repetition. It turns something into a mental environment. This is why attention is so valuable. Attention is not simply focused. It is energy, perception, memory, emotional rehearsal, identity formation, and behavioral preparation. What captures attention trains the body in what to expect. It tells the mind what kind of world it is living in. So when platforms, media systems, advertisers, political campaigns, influencers, institutions, and social groups compete for attention, they are not merely competing for views. They are competing to shape reality. The attention economy monitors the doorway into perception. It learns what keeps people looking. Fear keeps people looking. Outrage keeps people looking. Beauty keeps people looking. Conflict keeps people looking. Novelty keeps people looking. Ambiguity keeps people looking. Scandal keeps people looking. Moral certainty keeps people looking. Identity confirmation keeps people looking. The threat keeps people looking. Hope keeps people looking when it promises relief. The system does not need to care whether the content makes people wiser. It needs to consider whether the content keeps people engaged. That is the marketplace, and the marketplace shapes the mind. A person may open a phone for one reason and leave with a different state. They may begin calm and end agitated. They may begin focused and end scattered. They may begin with content and end by comparing. They may begin curious and end morally activated. They may begin with a question and end inside an algorithmic tunnel of answers chosen to keep them moving. This is not accidental. Digital architecture is designed around capture, retention, and return. The feed is not simply a list. It is a behavioral environment. The notification is not simply information. It is an interruption queue. The thumbnail is not simply an image. It is an invitation to the state. The headline is not simply a summary. It is a hook. The comment section is not simply a discussion. It is often an emotional escalation. The like count is not simply feedback. It is social proof. The algorithm is not simply a delivery. It is shaping repetition. The field designs what we keep returning to, and what we keep returning to begins to train what we expect. This is why attention has to be reclaimed carefully, not by pretending we can leave the modern world completely, not by moralizing every digital habit, not by saying technology is evil. The issue is not that attention can be captured. Attention has always been capturable. The issue is that the modern field is highly skilled at capturing attention before the person has consciously chosen what deserves their life. The discerning question becomes, what is capturing my attention? That question is more powerful than it first appears. What am I checking repeatedly? What am I waiting for? What am I scanning for? What do I return to when I feel uncertain, bored, lonely, angry, ashamed, or tired? What topics keep entering my nervous system? What arguments keep rehearsing inside me? What images keep shaping my desire? What conflicts keep shaping my emotional world? What voices keep telling me what reality means? Then ask, what state is this attention pattern producing? Is it producing clarity or agitation, agency or dependency, connection or comparison, discernment or compulsive suspicion, moral seriousness or moral possession, learning or fragmentation, presence or constant checking, hope or fantasy, concern or chronic threat? The state matters because attention is not neutral. A person may say, I am just staying informed, while their body is being trained into panic. They may say, I am just researching, while their mind is becoming more compulsive. They may say, I am just checking, while their attention is being shaped into dependency. They may say, I am just engaging, while the platform is training outrage as a reflex. Again, the point is not to shame. It is to notice the loop. Attention capture often enters through a real need. The need for information, the need for connection, the need for recognition, the need for relief, the need for distraction, the need for status, the need for certainty, the need to know what is happening. These needs are human, but the field can exploit them. A lonely person may be captured by social validation. An anxious person may be captured by threat updates. A person with status wounds may be captured by comparison. A person who feels powerless may be captured by outrage. A person who feels betrayed may be captured by hidden narrative content. A person who feels unseen may be captured by public performance. A person who feels uncertain may be captured by authoritative certainty. Outer design meets inner vulnerability. That is influence. This is why the question, what am I being pulled away from, is important. Attention capture not only gives us something, it takes us from something else, from the body, from rest, from relationships, from deep work, from creative thought, from silence, from slow reading, from prayer, from presence, from physical movement, from ordinary life, from the ability to sit with uncertainty without immediately seeking stimulation. The attention economy not only fills the mind, it fragments the conditions in which deeper perception forms. This matters because discernment requires space. It requires enough uninterrupted attention to notice patterns, reflect, regulate, and compare interpretations. If attention is constantly broken, discernment becomes harder. The person may still hold many opinions, but opinion is not the same as clarity. They may consume many fragments, but fragments are not the same as understanding. A fragmented attention field creates fragmented perception. The person knows many things, but not deeply, reacts quickly, but does not integrate, sees patterns, but may not test them, feels informed, but often remains activated. This is why clarity inside the field requires attention sovereignty, not total control, not isolation, but a conscious relationship with where attention goes, what state it creates, and what reality it is building through repetition. Another question from episode 8 was, what pathway is being made easiest? This applies beyond digital life. In any environment, the easiest pathway often becomes the chosen pathway. If the easiest pathway is consumption, we consume. If the easiest pathway is outrage, we react. If the easiest pathway is silence, we stay quiet. If the easiest pathway is agreement, we conform. If the easiest pathway is an impulsive purchase, we buy. If the easiest pathway is comparison, we compare. If the easiest pathway is superficial engagement, we skim. Design matters because people are not purely abstract choosers. We are embodied beings moving through paths of least resistance. This is why influential architecture is powerful. It does not always need to convince us. It can simply make one behavior frictionless and another behavior effortful. To reclaim agency, sometimes we need to redesign the field. Remove the app, change the room, create pauses, make healthier choices more visible, make compulsive choices less immediate, choose different sources, change notification settings, leave groups that reward activation, build rituals that restore attention, put the body back into the day. Create enough silence to hear what the field has been drowning out. Discernment is not only mental resistance, it is environmental design. If the field shapes us, then we can shape the field we repeatedly enter. This is not total freedom, but it is real agency. We can ask, what environment helps me perceive more clearly? What rhythms help my nervous system widen? What conversations make me more honest? What sources increase understanding rather than dependency? What spaces restore attention rather than fragment it? What practices return me to the body? What relationships let me think without performing? These questions matter because influence architecture is not only something done to us, it is also something we participate in. We design fields for others through our tone, timing, language, posts, reactions, questions, silences, expectations, and emotional states. We can become part of the architecture that shapes someone else's perception. So the ethics of attention is not only personal, it is relational. Do I create fields where others can think, or do I create fields where they must react? Do I use urgency to pressure? Do I use moral language to shut down? Do I use affection to guide behavior? Do I use silence as punishment? Do I use complexity or as a fog? Do I use attention to nourish or to extract? The marketplace of attention is not only external. We all participate in economies of focus. We reward what we respond to. We amplify what we share. We train others through what we notice. We teach people what gains our approval. This brings us back to the central line. The field not only tells us what to think, it designs what we keep returning to. So the discerning questions are practical. What is capturing my attention? What state is it producing? What am I being pulled away from? What pathway is being made easiest? What reality is this attention pattern building? What would I notice if my attention returned to me? That final question is the opening. What would I notice if my attention returned to me? Perhaps I would notice exhaustion under constant information, loneliness under scrolling, fear under research, envy under comparison, a need for meaning under outrage, a need for rest under productivity, a need for contact under performance, a need for silence under stimulation, a need for truth under certainty. Attention returning to the self does not mean narcissism. It means bringing awareness back from the field that has been spending it. It means asking whether the life we are living is the one our attention is helping to build. Because attention is how the field enters us. And attention is also one of the ways we return to ourselves. Part 6: Narrative, Morality, and the Sacred Story. When meaning becomes possession, if attention selects the fragments, narrative arranges them into meaning. And once morality enters the story, the meaning becomes charged with righteousness. This is where perception becomes deeply powerful and also deeply dangerous. Because human beings do not simply experience events. We explain them, we connect them, we place them inside a story. We ask who caused this, what it means, who was harmed, who is responsible, who can be trusted, who is dangerous, who is innocent, who is guilty, what future is coming, and what role we are supposed to play. Narrative turns experience into a world. A delayed reply becomes abandonment. A disagreement becomes betrayal. A policy becomes protection or control. A public figure becomes a hero or villain. A group becomes compassionate or corrupt. A childhood wound becomes identity. A cultural shift becomes progress or decline. A crisis becomes evidence of awakening, collapse, rescue, manipulation, or punishment. The event matters. Evidence matters. Reality matters. But the story tells the nervous system what the event means. Episode 11 explored this as narrative capture. We saw how stories organize identity, memory, belonging, public reality, personal pain, collective meaning, and moral imagination. We saw that human beings need stories. Without narrative, life becomes fragments. Suffering lacks context. Memory lacks continuity. Identity lacks coherence. Groups lack shared meaning. Cultures cannot carry wisdom, grief, warning, or hope through time. So the story is not the enemy. The danger begins when the story becomes more important than reality. A story may begin as survival. I had to be strong. People leave. I cannot trust authority. Our group has been harmed. This system is corrupt. These people understand me. This movement is protecting something sacred. This leader is telling the truth. This institution cannot be trusted. This community is a safe place. Some of these stories may contain real truth. The person may have been abandoned. The group may have been harmed. The system may contain corruption. The institution may have broken trust. The community may genuinely have provided protection. But a story that begins in truth can still become total. It becomes total when every new piece of reality must fit inside it. Every silence becomes abandonment. Every disagreement becomes an attack. Every authority becomes deception. Every outsider becomes a threat. Every critic becomes an enemy. Every doubt becomes weakness. Every contradiction becomes proof that the story is even more necessary. That is narrative capture. The story no longer helps us see. It decides what we are allowed to see, and then, if morality fuses with the story becomes sacred. This was the movement of episode 12, moral certainty and ethical inversion. Once a narrative becomes morally charged, it does not merely say, this is what happened. It says, this is good, this is evil, this is safe, this is dangerous, this person deserves compassion, that person deserves punishment, this question is responsible, that question is harmful. This behavior is justified because we are defending justice, safety, truth, compassion, freedom, or protection. At this point, the story becomes more than an explanation. It becomes permission. That is where ethical danger begins. A story becomes dangerous when it explains reality, protects identity, and sanctifies behavior all at once. It explains reality by telling us what is happening. It protects identity by telling us who we are inside the story. It sanctifies behavior by telling us what we are allowed to do in defense of the story. This is why sacred stories can become so difficult to question. If I challenge the story, I am not only challenging an interpretation. I may be challenging someone's survival narrative, moral identity, group belonging, status, grief, hope, or sense of reality. The person may not hear the challenge as a question. They may hear it as a threat to the world that holds them together. This is true personally. A person may carry the story, I am the one no one ever chooses. That story may be rooted in real pain. But if it becomes sacred, every new relationship must eventually prove it. Love becomes suspicious. Care becomes temporary. Distance becomes confirmation. The person may test, withdraw, accuse, cling, or sabotage, and when the relationship strains under that pressure, the story says, see, I was right. The story produces the behavior that confirms the story. Then the story becomes identity. And if morality enters, the person may begin to say, I am only protecting myself. That may be partly true, but protection can become control. Fear can become accusation. Pain can become permission to harm. The person may justify their own reactions because the story has placed them permanently in the role of the wounded one. This is not said with judgment. Many people do this because their bodies are still organized around old pain. But discernment asks whether the story still leaves room for the present to be different. This is also true in groups. A group may tell the story, we are the compassionate ones. That story may begin with genuine care. The group may truly have named suffering others ignored. It may have defended people who were harmed. It may have created language, support, and solidarity. But if the story becomes sacred, the group may struggle to see its own cruelty. If compassion is the group's identity, then cruelty committed by the group must be renamed. It becomes accountability. It becomes protection. It becomes necessary pressure. It becomes defending the vulnerable. The value remains beautiful in language. The method betrays it. That is ethical inversion. Once a story becomes morally sacred, people may stop asking whether their methods still belong to their values. That is one of the central lines of this entire series. A person says they defend truth, but uses truth to humiliate. A group says it defends safety, but uses safety to silence. A movement says it defends justice, but uses justice to justify revenge. A community says it defends compassion, but uses compassion to control what can be said. A family says it defends love, but uses love to demand obedience. A public audience says it wants accountability, but feeds on punishment. The moral story cleans the method. It tells people, because our cause is good, our behavior must be good. But that is not ethics. Ethics must examine the method. The question is not only, what value am I defending? The question is, does my behavior still embody that value? That question returns morality to practice. Narrative and morality become especially dangerous when they create fixed roles. Hero, victim, villain, savior, traitor, fool, oppressor, rescuer, awakened one, sleeping one, safe one, dangerous one. Once these roles are assigned, perception narrows. The hero's harm is excused. The villain's humanity is ignored. The victim's agency is reduced. The savior's control is romanticized. The traitor's concerns are dismissed. The fool's insight is overlooked. Roles simplify reality. Sometimes roles are necessary as temporary descriptions. There are victims. There are perpetrators. There are courageous people. There are harmful people. There are genuine betrayals and genuine rescues. But when roles become permanent identities, reality cannot move. A person who caused harm cannot change. A person who was harmed cannot grow. A group that did well cannot be corrected. A group that did wrong cannot be understood. The story freezes everyone in place. Discernment asks, who am I in this story? Am I the hero, the victim, the outsider, the rescuer, the truth teller, the awakened one, the betrayed one, the safe one, the good one? And who have I made the villain? What happens if the villain becomes more complex? What happens if the victim has agency? What happens if the hero is flawed? What happens if the story is partly true, but not complete? These questions are uncomfortable because they loosen the sacred structure. But that loosening is where reality can enter. Cultural and political narratives operate the same way at scale. A society may live inside a story of decline, progress, crisis, betrayal, awakening, rescue, restoration, liberation, corruption, or collapse. These stories shape public emotion. They tell people whether to feel fear, pride, shame, urgency, hope, resentment, suspicion, or moral certainty. They tell people what action feels necessary and what questions feel dangerous. Again, these narratives may contain truth. There can be a real decline, real progress, real crisis, real betrayal, real liberation, real corruption, real need for repair. But when one narrative becomes total, it absorbs everything. Every event proves a decline. Every change proves progress. Every mistake proves corruption. Every question proves complicity. Every hesitation proves cowardice. Every dissent proves betrayal. Every complexity proves someone is trying to distract from the truth. A total story cannot be learned. It can only confirm itself. And when that total story becomes morally sacred, people may justify almost anything to defend it. They may shame in the name of compassion, control in the name of safety, deceive in the name of truth, dehumanize in the name of justice, punish in the name of protection, silence in the name of care. This is why the sacred story must be examined, not destroyed, examined. Because we need stories, we need moral orientation, we need meaning, we need values, we need to name harm, we need to protect what matters. But we also need enough humility to ask whether the story has become too powerful, too clean, too certain, too fused with identity, too defended by the group, too protected from correction. The discerning questions are simple, but deep. What story am I inside? Who am I in this story? Who is the villain, victim, hero, or savior? What does this story help me see? What does it prevent me from seeing? What value am I defending? Does my behavior still embody that value? What harm am I justifying because I believe I am right? What would become visible if the plot loosened? These questions do not make us morally weaker. They make morality more honest. Because the aim is not to live without a story. It is to live with stories that remain answerable to reality. The aim is not to abandon values. It is to embody them more truthfully. The aim is not to stop caring. It is to care without becoming possessed by the clean feeling of righteousness. This is where the series begins to converge. Emotion charges the story, identity protects it, status rewards it, groups reinforce it, attention repeats it, authority legitimizes it, incentives train people to perform it, morality sanctifies it, and before long the story no longer feels like a story. It feels like reality itself. Discernment is the pause that says, perhaps this is real, but let me see what has shaped it. Let me see the frame. Let me see the role. Let me see the value. Let me see the method. Let me see the human being behind the label. Let me see whether truth is still allowed to interrupt the story. Because when meaning becomes possession, reality has to fight its way through the plot. Part 6: Narrative, Morality, and the Sacred Story. When meaning becomes possession, if attention selects the fragments, narrative arranges them into meaning. And once morality enters the story, the meaning becomes charged with righteousness. This is where perception becomes deeply powerful, and also deeply dangerous. Because human beings do not simply experience events. We explain them, we connect them, we place them inside a story. We ask who caused this, what it means, who was harmed, who is responsible, who can be trusted, who is dangerous, who is innocent, who is guilty, what future is coming, and what role we are supposed to play. Narrative turns experience into a world. A delayed reply becomes abandonment. A disagreement becomes betrayal. A policy becomes protection or control. A public figure becomes a hero or villain. A group becomes compassionate or corrupt. A childhood wound becomes identity. A cultural shift becomes progress or decline. A crisis becomes evidence of awakening, collapse, rescue, manipulation, or punishment. The event matters, evidence matters, reality matters. But the story tells the nervous system what the event means. Episode 11 explored this as narrative capture. We saw how stories organize identity, memory, belonging, public reality, personal pain, collective meaning, and moral imagination. We saw that human beings need stories. Without narrative, life becomes fragments. Suffering lacks context. Memory lacks continuity. Identity lacks coherence. Groups lack shared meaning. Cultures cannot carry wisdom, grief, warning, or hope through time. So the story is not the enemy. The danger begins when the story becomes more important than reality. A story may begin as survival. I had to be strong. People leave. I cannot trust authority. Our group has been harmed. This system is corrupt. These people understand me. This movement is protecting something sacred. This leader is telling the truth. This institution cannot be trusted. This community is a safe place. Some of these stories may contain real truth. The person may have been abandoned. The group may have been harmed. The system may contain corruption. The institution may have broken trust. The community may genuinely have provided protection. But a story that begins in truth can still become total. It becomes total when every new piece of reality must fit inside it. Every silence becomes abandonment. Every disagreement becomes an attack. Every authority becomes deception. Every outsider becomes a threat. Every critic becomes an enemy. Every doubt becomes weakness. Every contradiction becomes proof that the story is even more necessary. That is narrative capture. The story no longer helps us see. It decides what we are allowed to see. And then, if morality fuses with the story becomes sacred. This was the movement of episode 12, Moral Certainty and Ethical Inversion. Once a narrative becomes morally charged, it does not merely say, this is what happened. It says, this is good. This is evil. This is safe. This is dangerous. This person deserves compassion. That person deserves punishment. This question is responsible. That question is harmful. This behavior is justified because we are defending justice, safety, truth, compassion, freedom, or protection. At this point, the story becomes more than an explanation. It becomes permission. That is where ethical danger begins. A story becomes dangerous when it explains reality, protects identity, and sanctifies behavior all at once. It explains reality by telling us what is happening. It protects identity by telling us who we are inside the story. It sanctifies behavior by telling us what we are allowed to do in defense of the story. This is why sacred stories can become so difficult to question. If I challenge the story, I am not only challenging an interpretation. I may be challenging someone's survival narrative, moral identity, group belonging, status, grief, hope, or sense of reality. The person may not hear the challenge as a question. They may hear it as a threat to the world that holds them together. This is true personally. A person may carry the story, I am the one no one ever chooses. That story may be rooted in real pain. But if it becomes sacred, every new relationship must eventually prove it. Love becomes suspicious. Care becomes temporary. Distance becomes confirmation. The person may test, withdraw, accuse, cling, or sabotage. And when the relationship strains under that pressure, the story says, see, I was right. The story produces the behavior that confirms the story. Then the story becomes identity. And if morality enters, the person may begin to say, I am only protecting myself. That may be partly true. But protection can become control. Fear can become accusation. Pain can become permission to harm. The person may justify their own reactions because the story has placed them permanently in the role of the wounded one. This is not said with judgment. Many people do this because their bodies are still organized around old pain. But discernment asks whether the story still leaves room for the present to be different. This is also true in groups. A group may tell the story, we are the compassionate ones. That story may begin with genuine care. The group may truly have named suffering others ignored. It may have defended people who were harmed. It may have created language, support, and solidarity. But if the story becomes sacred, the group may struggle to see its own cruelty. If compassion is the group's identity, then cruelty committed by the group must be renamed. It becomes accountability. It becomes protection. It becomes necessary pressure. It becomes defending the vulnerable. The value remains beautiful in language. The method betrays it. That is ethical inversion. Once a story becomes morally sacred, people may stop asking whether their methods still belong to their values. That is one of the central lines of this entire series. A person says they defend truth, but uses truth to humiliate. A group says it defends safety, but uses safety to silence. A movement says it defends justice, but uses justice to justify revenge. A community says it defends compassion, but uses compassion to control what can be said. A family says it defends love, but uses love to demand obedience. A public audience says it wants accountability, but feeds on punishment. The moral story cleans the method. It tells people, because our cause is good, our behavior must be good. But that is not ethics. Ethics must examine the method. The question is not only, what value am I defending? The question is, does my behavior still embody that value? That question returns morality to practice. Narrative and morality become especially dangerous when they create fixed roles. Hero, victim, villain, savior, traitor, fool, oppressor, rescuer, awakened one, sleeping one, safe one, dangerous one. Once these roles are assigned, perception narrows. The hero's harm is excused. The villain's humanity is ignored. The victim's agency is reduced. The savior's control is romanticized. The traitor's concerns are dismissed. The fool's insight is overlooked. Roles simplify reality. Sometimes roles are necessary as temporary descriptions. There are victims. There are perpetrators. There are courageous people. There are harmful people. There are genuine betrayals and genuine rescues. But when roles become permanent identities, reality cannot move. A person who caused harm cannot change. A person who was harmed cannot grow. A group that did well cannot be corrected. A group that did wrong cannot be understood. The story freezes everyone in place. Discernment asks, who am I in this story? Am I the hero, the victim, the outsider, the rescuer, the truth teller, the awakened one, the betrayed one, the safe one, the good one? And who have I made the villain? What happens if the villain becomes more complex? What happens if the victim has agency? What happens if the hero is flawed? What happens if the story is partly true, but not complete? These questions are uncomfortable because they loosen the sacred structure. But that loosening is where reality can enter. Cultural and political narratives operate the same way at scale. A society may live inside a story of decline, progress, crisis, betrayal, awakening, rescue, restoration, liberation, corruption, or collapse. These stories shape public emotion. They tell people whether to feel fear, pride, shame, urgency, hope, resentment, suspicion, or moral certainty. They tell people what action feels necessary and what questions feel dangerous. Again, these narratives may contain truth. There can be a real decline, real progress, real crisis, real betrayal, real liberation, real corruption, real need for repair. But when one narrative becomes total, it absorbs everything. Every event proves a decline. Every change proves progress. Every mistake proves corruption. Every question proves complicity. Every hesitation proves cowardice. Every dissent proves betrayal. Every complexity proves someone is trying to distract from the truth. A total story cannot be learned. It can only confirm itself. And when that total story becomes morally sacred, people may justify almost anything to defend it. They may shame in the name of compassion, control in the name of safety, deceive in the name of truth, dehumanize in the name of justice, punish in the name of protection, silence in the name of care. This is why the sacred story must be examined, not destroyed. Examined, because we need stories, we need moral orientation, we need meaning, we need values, we need to name harm, we need to protect what matters. But we also need enough humility to ask whether the story has become too powerful, too clean, too certain, too fused with identity, too defended by the group, too protected from correction. The discerning questions are simple but deep. What story am I inside? Who am I in this story? Who is the villain, victim, hero, or savior? What does this story help me see? What does it prevent me from seeing? What value am I defending? Does my behavior still embody that value? What harm am I justifying because I believe I am right? What would become visible if the plot loosened? These questions do not make us morally weaker. They make morality more honest. Because the aim is not to live without a story. It is to live with stories that remain answerable to reality. The aim is not to abandon values. It is to embody them more truthfully. The aim is not to stop caring. It is to care without becoming possessed by the clean feeling of righteousness. This is where the series begins to converge. Emotion charges the story. Identity protects it. Status rewards it. Groups reinforce it. Attention repeats it. Authority legitimizes it. Incentives train people to perform it. Morality sanctifies it. And before long, the story no longer feels like a story. It feels like reality itself. Discernment is the pause that says, perhaps this is real, but let me see what has shaped it. Let me see the frame. Let me see the role. Let me see the value. Let me see the method. Let me see the human being behind the label. Let me see whether truth is still allowed to interrupt the story. Because when meaning becomes possession, reality has to fight its way through the plot. And discernment is the practice of opening the plot wide enough for reality to breathe. Part 7: Belonging, Authority and Outsourced Reality. Who gets to hold the map? If narrative gives meaning and morality charges that meaning with righteousness, then belonging and authority decide who gets to hold the map. This is where the field becomes deeply social, because human beings do not only ask, what do I believe? They also ask, often beneath awareness, who are my people, and who do my people trust? We do not move through reality as isolated minds. We move through families, communities, cultures, professions, movements, digital audiences, spiritual spaces, political tribes, friendship groups, institutions, and shared stories. These groups help us orient. They tell us what matters, what language to use, what questions are acceptable, what emotions belong, what enemies to recognize, and which voices should be trusted. Episode 13 explored belonging, collective identity, emotional synchrony, conformity, social cost, shared enemies, loyalty, exile, and the fear of leaving. Episode 14 explored authority, credentials, expertise, charisma, consensus, manufactured trust, distrust, and alternative experts. Now, in this final integration, those two layers come together, because groups do not only share beliefs, they share trust maps. A trust map tells the group who has authority, who is credible, who is captured, who is dangerous, who is brave, who is foolish, who is an expert, who is corrupt, who is awake, who is naive, who is one of us, who is one of them, who should be listened to, who should be dismissed before they finish speaking. This is one of the most powerful ways perception is shaped. The group does not have to tell every member what to think about every issue. It simply teaches them which sources to trust, which authorities to reject, which commentators to repeat, which institutions to suspect, which experts to respect, which dissidents to admire, which witnesses to believe, and which questions signal disloyalty. Once the trust map is installed, perception begins to move along group-approved pathways. If my group trusts official institutions, institutional language may feel reassuring. If my group distrusts official institutions, the same language may feel manipulative. If my group values rebellion, the outsider may feel more credible than the expert. If my group values expertise, the outsider may feel irresponsible before they have been heard. If my group sees itself as compassionate, its chosen moral voices may feel safe. If my group sees itself as awakened, those who confirm hidden patterns may feel authoritative. So the question is not only, who do I trust? It is also, who has taught me who to trust? This question matters because trust rarely feels socially shaped from the inside. It feels personal, it feels intuitive, it feels earned, it feels obvious. But often, the group has already prepared the emotional meaning of the voice before the voice speaks. A doctor appears, and one group feels safe. Another group feels suspicion. A rebel appears, and one group feels courage. Another group feels reckless. A spiritual teacher appears, and one group feels depth. Another group feels manipulated. A government body appears, and one group feels legitimacy. Another group feels control. A whistleblower appears, and one group feels the truth. Another group feels danger. A mainstream journalist appears, and one group feels credibility. Another group feels framing. The same authority signal lands differently depending on the trust map beneath it. This does not mean every trust map is equally valid. Some sources are more reliable than others. Some experts are better qualified. Some institutions are more accountable. Some dissidents are more rigorous. Some witnesses are more credible. Discernment is not relativism. But it does mean our first reaction to authority often comes through belonging. The group tells the nervous system who feels safe. And once an authority feels safe, we may examine them less. That is the danger. Authority becomes especially powerful when it gives the group what the group emotionally needs. If a group is anxious, it may trust the voice that offers stability. If a group is angry, it may trust the voice that names the enemy. If a group is ashamed, it may trust the voice that restores moral dignity. If a group is betrayed, it may trust the voice that confirms betrayal. If a group is uncertain, it may trust the voice that speaks with confidence. If a group is lonely, it may trust the voice that creates shared belonging. This is not always wrong. A voice may meet a real need and still be truthful, but the need can also make the group vulnerable. A group hungry for certainty may confuse confidence with truth. A group hungry for safety may confuse control with protection. A group hungry for belonging may confuse agreement with reality. A group hungry for rebellion may confuse opposition with accuracy. A group hungry for healing may confuse warmth with expertise. A group hungry for justice may confuse punishment with repair. Belonging and authority reinforce each other. The group gives authority to a voice, and the voice gives coherence to the group. The authority explains the world in a way the group recognizes. The group repeats the authority's language. The language strengthens the group identity. The identity deepens trust in the authority. The loop tightens. Over time, the authority does not need to prove every claim. The authority has become part of the group's reality-making system. This can happen formally or informally. In a professional field, trusted authorities may be senior figures, accredited bodies, journals, panels, or institutions. In a family, authority may belong to a parent, elder, dominant sibling, or the person who controls the emotional climate. In a spiritual community, authority may belong to a teacher, founder, lineage, method, or group interpretation. In a political movement, authority may belong to commentators, leaders, thinkers, slogans, parties, influencers, or approved sources. In online groups, authority may belong to accounts that consistently supply the group's emotional and narrative needs. In each case, the group may believe it is thinking independently while repeating the interpretive frame of its trusted authorities. This is an outsourced reality. Outsourced reality happens when the person or group no longer asks what is happening, but what does our trusted voice say is happening? Again, some outsourcing is unavoidable. No one can verify everything. We need authority, we need expertise, we need testimony, we need guides. The issue is not that we rely on others. The issue is whether that reliance remains awake. The question is not whether we trust authority, but whether our trust remains awake. Awakened trust can listen without kneeling. It can value expertise without surrendering perception. It can learn from a teacher without making them sacred. It can respect a group's wisdom without allowing the group to own reality. It can use authority as a guide, not as a replacement for conscience. Sleeping trust does something else. It says, this voice tells us what is real. This source defines the map. This leader interprets the field. This institution cannot be questioned. This rebel cannot be wrong. This expert cannot be corrupted. This teacher cannot manipulate. This group cannot distort. This consensus cannot be updated. This dissident cannot exaggerate. Sleeping trust turns authority into a substitute for perception. This is where belonging becomes dangerous. If belonging depends on trusting the same authority, then questioning that authority risks losing the group. The person is no longer only evaluating evidence. They are evaluating social cost. What happens if I question the expert my group trusts? What happens if I ask whether the rebel we admire is wrong? What happens if I say the institution we defend has failed? What happens if I admit the authority we oppose has a valid point? What happens if I stop using the group's approved source? What happens if I say I do not know? These questions can become expensive. A person may privately doubt, but publicly remain aligned. They may continue sharing the approved voice. They may suppress alternative information. They may mock authorities the group mocks, and praise authorities the group praises. They may stop evaluating and start signaling. This is how trust becomes performance. It is no longer only about who is credible. It becomes about proving membership through whom we trust and whom we refuse to trust. In some groups, trusting the wrong person is betrayal. Reading the wrong source is contamination. Asking the wrong question is evidence of capture. Respecting the wrong expert is a moral failure. Humanizing the wrong critic is a danger. The trust map becomes a loyalty test. That is no longer discernment. That is belonging to regulating reality. A healthy group should help members become better at evaluating authority. It should encourage questions like, what qualifies this person? What evidence do they provide? What incentives shape them? How do they handle correction? What do their critics say? What are the limits of their claim? What would make us update our trust? An unhealthy group says, trust who we trust, distrust who we distrust, and do not disturb the map. This can happen on all sides. There is no group immune to it. Official culture can demand trust in institutions without enough transparency. Alternative culture can demand distrust of institutions without enough evidence. Spiritual culture can demand trust in intuition, teachers, or energetic interpretation. Activist culture can demand trust in moral authority. Professional culture can demand trust in credentials. Family culture can demand trust in elders. Digital culture can demand trust in whoever captures attention most effectively. Each field has its authorized voices. Each field has forbidden voices. Each field has expensive questions. So the discerning person learns to ask, what does this group require from me? Does it require honest inquiry or approved trust? What truth becomes costly here? Can I question the group's trusted authorities without losing dignity? Who does this group trust to define reality? Why do I trust them? Does this authority increase my agency or ask me to surrender perception? Am I belonging or disappearing? These questions bring together episodes 13 and 14. Belonging tells us where we feel held. Authority tells us where we place trust. Together, they can either strengthen discernment or replace it. A healthy belonging field can say, we trust this source for good reasons, but trust must remain open to correction. It can say, this expert is qualified here, but not everywhere. It can say, this rebel raised an important question, but we still need evidence. It can say, this institution has knowledge and also incentives. It can say, this teacher helped us and still must remain accountable. It can say, our group's trust map may contain blind spots. That kind of group is rare, but it is possible. It requires humility. It requires a willingness to let reality interrupt belonging. It requires loyalty to truth over loyalty to the emotional comfort of the circle. An unhealthy group cannot do this. It needs the trust map to remain stable, because the trust map holds the group identity together. If the trusted authority falls, the group trembles. If the enemy authority becomes complex, the group trembles. If the approved source is wrong, the group trembles. If the rejected source is right, the group trembles. So the group protects the map, and by protecting the map, it may protect against distortion. This is why Season 2 can go even deeper into applied terrains. Because once we have mapped the basic forces of discernment, the next set of episodes can examine the lived arenas where trust, belonging, authority, and perception collide. Media ecosystems, education systems, health and wellness spaces, digital identity, artificial intelligence, family narratives, relationship dynamics, institutional trust, spiritual authority, public fear, cultural conflict, and the new forms of reality making emerging through technology. These are not separate from the field. They are where the field becomes daily life. But for now, the integration is clear. The self does not only form beliefs alone. The self belongs. The group trusts. Authority interprets. The map is shared. And unless discernment remains awake, the person may mistake the group's trust map for reality itself. So the practice is not to trust anyone. It is to notice who holds the map, who drew it, who benefits from it, who is missing from it, what it makes visible, what it hides, and whether you are still allowed to look at the terrain for yourself. Because the map can help, but the map must never become more sacred than the reality it claims to describe. Part 8, the discernment practice, a living method for clarity. If the field shapes perception through body, emotion, identity, incentives, attention, narrative, morality, belonging, and authority, then discernment needs to become more than an idea. It has to become a practice, a way of pausing, a way of returning, a way of asking better questions before perception hardens into certainty. We can call this practice the discernment field check. The first layer is the state. What is happening in my body right now? Am I open, tense, collapsed, defensive, restless, ashamed, afraid, angry, numb, or overexcited? The body is often the first interpreter. If the body is in threat, perception may already be narrowing before thought has caught up. The second layer is emotion. What emotion is interpreting this moment for me? Fear may be narrating danger. Anger may be narrating violation. Shame may be narrating exposure. Hope may be narrating a possibility. Disgust may be narrating contamination. Grief may be narrating loss. None of these emotions is automatically wrong, but none of them should become the only narrator. The third layer is attention. What has captured my focus? What am I repeatedly checking, scanning, reading, watching, replaying, or reacting to? Attention is not passive. Whatever repeatedly captures attention begins to build reality inside the nervous system. The fourth layer is the frame. What meaning has already been placed around this? Is this being framed as safety, progress, decline, justice, threat, compassion, betrayal, awakening, crisis, rescue, or harm? The frame often decides the first emotional response before the evidence is examined. The fifth layer is narrative. What story am I inside? Am I in a story of abandonment, persecution, failure, superiority, betrayal, moral rescue, social collapse, personal inadequacy, or hidden truth? A story can help organize reality, but it can also become a cage if reality is no longer allowed to interrupt it. The sixth layer is identity. What self-image is being protected? Am I protecting the identity of being rational, good, aware, harmed, strong, independent, compassionate, skeptical, loyal, awakened, or safe? The more a belief protects identity, the harder it becomes to examine. The seventh layer is incentive. What behavior is being rewarded or punished here? What does this system want from me? Does it reward speed, outrage, silence, obedience, beauty, productivity, certainty, victimhood, loyalty, exposure, or emotional performance? The loop reveals the true values of the field. The eighth layer is belonging. What would it cost me to disagree? Would I lose warmth, status, approval, identity, access, friendship, safety, or the feeling of being one of us? Belonging is human, but if connection requires self-abandonment, it has become captivity. The ninth layer is authority. Who am I trusting, and why? Am I trusting credentials, charisma, consensus, rebellion, lived experience, institutional legitimacy, group approval, or emotional resonance? A trustworthy authority should increase my understanding, not replace my perception. The 10th layer is value. Does my method still embody the value I claim to defend? If I say I am defending compassion, is compassion still present? If I say I am defending justice, is the process still just? If I say I am defending truth, am I illuminating or humiliating? If I say I am defending safety, am I protecting agency or removing it? The 11th layer is updated. What evidence, experience, conversation, or reflection would change my view? If nothing could update me, then I may not be discerning, I may be defending. And the final layer is return. What becomes visible when I pause, regulate, and widen the field? What do I see when I am less activated, less ashamed, less identified, less captured by attention, less afraid of exile, less dependent on authority, and less possessed by the story? This practice is not a formula for perfect perception. There is no such thing. It is a way of creating space between stimulus and certainty, and it carries one warning. Discernment is not a weapon to use only on others. If discernment only points outward, it becomes superiority. It becomes another identity, another status game, another way of saying, I see through them. But the real practice must also turn inward. It must ask how I am shaped, how I am rewarded, how I am captured, how I am defended, how I am seduced by certainty, belonging, status, and story. Discernment is not the performance of seeing through everything. It is the discipline of allowing reality to interrupt us. Part 9: Integration, living with clarity inside the field. So, as we come to the close of this first series, we return to the central idea that has been moving beneath every episode. Perception is not simply something we have. Perception is something shaped. It is shaped by the body before belief becomes conscious. It is shaped by fear, shame, anger, hope, grief, disgust, urgency, and collapse. It is shaped by the nervous system's search for safety. It is shaped by identity, status, memory, and the need to remain someone recognizable to ourselves and others. It is shaped by incentives, feedback loops, reward systems, punishments, and the repeated corrections of families, workplaces, platforms, institutions, and groups. It is shaped by influence architecture, attention capture, narrative, moral certainty, belonging, authority, trust, and the voices we allow to tell us what reality means. This is the field, not a field outside life, but the field of life itself, the atmosphere in which thought forms, the pressure around emotion, the architecture around attention, the story around identity, the reward for behavior, the authority around truth, the belonging around speech, the morality around action. Across this first series, we have mapped how human beings are shaped from every direction, not to create fear, not to create suspicion, not to turn people against trust, belonging, morality, or expertise, but to bring more awareness to the places where perception can become automatic, captured, narrowed, trained, performed, or surrendered before we realize what has happened. Because discernment is not an escape from the field. Discernment is conscious participation in it. We cannot live outside perception. We cannot live outside emotion. We cannot live outside the body. We cannot live without story, belonging, trust, language, authority, morality, attention, or shared meaning. To try to escape all influence would be to escape being human. We are relational beings. We are embodied beings. We are meaning-making beings. We are shaped by each other, and we shape each other in return. The question is not whether we are influenced. The question is whether we can become more conscious of how influence moves through us. That is the deeper aim. Discernment begins when we ask, what is shaping my perception right now? That question is both simple and radical. It interrupts the assumption that we are merely seeing reality as it is. It invites us to ask whether we are seeing through fear, shame, urgency, identity, status, narrative, belonging, moral certainty, authority, or a field of repeated attention. It does not deny reality. It brings us closer to it by asking what stands between us and a wider view. So we ask, what state am I in? If I am activated, what is activation making obvious? If I am afraid, what threat is fear enlarging? If I am ashamed, what truth feels too exposing to face? If I am angry, what boundary is anger protecting, and what complexity might it be erasing? If I am hopeful, what promise is hope making easier to believe? If I am tired, overwhelmed, or fragmented, what shortcuts might my mind be taking because I do not have the capacity to hold more? Then we ask, what emotion is narrating? Emotion is not the enemy. Emotion carries information, but emotion becomes dangerous when it becomes the only narrator. Fear may tell a story of danger. Anger may tell a story of violation. Shame may tell a story of social death. Grief may tell a story of permanent loss. Disgust may tell a story of contamination. Hope may tell a story of rescue. Each emotion may reveal something real, but none of them should be allowed to become the whole of reality without question. Then we ask, what identity is being protected? Who do I need to be in this moment? The rational one? The good one? The awakened one? The harmed one? The strong one? The safe one? The independent one? The one who sees? The one who cannot be fooled? The one who never needs? The one who has healed? The one who has been right all along? Identity is powerful because it makes some truths feel unbearable. If a belief protects my self-image, then evidence against it may feel like an attack. If a story gives me status, then loosening it may feel like losing rank. If a role helped me survive, then growing beyond it may feel like a betrayal of the self that endured. So discernment asks, am I seeking truth or defending a self-image? Then we ask, what behavior is being reinforced? This question brings us back to systems. What is the loop rewarding? What is being punished? What gets attention? What gets approval? What gets silence? What gets status? What gets safety? What gets belonging? What gets money? What gets visibility? What provides emotional relief? A system reveals itself through its rewards. Families may reward silence while speaking of love. Workplaces may reward overwork while speaking of well-being. Platforms may reward outrage while speaking of connection. Groups may reward loyalty while speaking the truth. Public debates may reward certainty while speaking of critical thinking. To understand behavior, we have to ask what the field is training. Then we ask, what has captured my attention? Attention is not passive. It is the doorway through which the field enters the nervous system. What we repeatedly return to begins to build reality inside us. If attention is constantly captured by threat, threat becomes the atmosphere. If it is captured by comparison, inadequacy grows. If it is captured by outrage, moral activation becomes familiar. If it is captured by scandal, suspicion becomes habitual. If it is captured by beauty, status, collapse, rescue, corruption, or fear, those realities become emotionally enlarged. So the question becomes, what am I being pulled towards and what am I being pulled away from? Am I being pulled away from silence, rest, the body, relationship, creativity, prayer, slow thought, physical presence, or the ordinary life in front of me? What reality is this attention pattern building? What would I notice if my attention returned to me? Then we ask, what story am I inside? Narrative organizes fragments into meaning. It tells us who we are, who harmed us, who can be trusted, what the future holds, what role we are playing, and what kind of world we are living in. A story is necessary, but when the story becomes total, reality is forced into the plot. Every new event becomes evidence for the same conclusion. So we ask, am I inside a story of betrayal, decline, awakening, rescue, abandonment, persecution, moral superiority, personal inadequacy, hidden truth, or inevitable collapse? What does this story help me see? What does it prevent me from seeing? Who is the hero, villain, victim, savior, fool, or traitor? What would become visible if the plot loosened? Then we ask, what value am I defending? This brings morality into the field. Am I defending justice, compassion, safety, truth, freedom, accountability, protection, love, care, or inclusion? And if so, does my method still belong to that value? Am I defending compassion while acting with contempt? Defending justice while feeding revenge? Defending safety while controlling speech? Defending truth while humiliating? Defending love while demanding possession? Defending accountability while creating spectacle? Morality requires discernment because goodness can become identity, justice can become revenge, safety can become control, compassion can become avoidance, and truth can become a weapon. The question is not only whether the value is beautiful, the question is whether the value is still alive in the way it is being practiced. Then we ask, what belonging am I protecting? What group, family, movement, friendship, community, audience, culture, or identity circle do I fear losing? What would it cost me to disagree? What truth becomes expensive there? What emotion does the group reward? Who must I oppose to remain inside the circle? What part of myself becomes quieter in that field? Belonging is human. It is not a weakness. We need connection. We need recognition. We need shared meaning. But belonging becomes captivity when remaining connected requires self-abandonment. So discernment asks, am I belonging or am I disappearing? Then we ask, what authority am I trusting? Who is telling me what reality means? An expert, institution, teacher, commentator, leader, platform, group, friend, former insider, spiritual voice, public figure, ribble, consensus, or credentialed authority? Why do I trust them? What qualifies them to speak here? What signals of credibility are being used? Are they helping me understand or asking me to surrender perception? Can this trust update? Authority is not the enemy. Unexamined authority is. Trust is necessary, but trust must remain awake. And finally, we ask, what would reality look like if the field loosened? If fear softened, what would I see? If shame released its grip, what would become speakable? If identity loosened, what truth could enter? If status mattered less, what could I admit? If the group's approval no longer ruled me, what would I ask? If the authority became less sacred, what would I examine? If the story became less total, what human complexity would return? This is not a one-time exercise. It is a way of living. Discernment is not the performance of seeing through everything. It is the discipline of allowing reality to interrupt us. That may be the most important line of this finale. Because discernment itself can become ego. It can become a posture. It can become a role. It can become another identity. The one who sees, the one who knows, the one who is not fooled, the one who stands above the masses, the one who has escaped conditioning. But if discernment becomes superiority, it has already lost humility. And without humility, discernment becomes another form of capture. True discernment does not make us cold. It should make us more human. It should help us notice manipulation without losing compassion for manipulated people. It should help us question authority without dismissing genuine expertise. It should help us recognize emotional activation without shaming emotion. It should help us see group conformity without despising the need to belong. It should help us name moral inversion without becoming morally superior. It should help us recognize narrative capture without mocking the stories people needed to survive. The purpose of this series has not been to make the listener suspicious of everything. It has been to help the listener become less unconsciously governed by anything that is different. Suspicion alone can trap us. Cynicism can trap us. Distrust can trap us. Constant exposure can trap us. The search for hidden motives can become its own prison. If everything becomes manipulation, we lose the ability to receive anything as sincere, beautiful, useful, or true. Discernment must stay connected to life. It must allow trust, but not blind trust. Belonging, but not disappearance. Morality, but not possession. Authority, but not surrender. Emotion, but not total narration. Story, but not imprisonment. Skepticism, but not cynicism. Clarity, but not coldness. Because the field is not only made of danger, it is also made of relationship, love, knowledge, memory, teaching, repair, beauty, courage, community, and the possibility of becoming more conscious together. The field shapes us, but it is also where we can practice. We practice every time we pause before reacting, every time we ask what state we are in, every time we question the story before it becomes identity, every time we notice the reward loop and choose not to obey it, every time we reclaim attention from the marketplace, every time we refuse to dehumanize the person the group has made into an enemy, every time we ask whether our method still aligns with our values, every time we trust expertise without kneeling before titles, every time we question a rebel without dismissing dissent, every time we stay connected without surrendering conscience, every time we let reality interrupt what we were certain of. These moments may seem small, but they are the practice of discernment. They are how a person lives with clarity inside the field. Mini-episode conclusion. Episode 15 shows that discernment is not an escape from the field. It is a conscious participation inside it. We cannot live outside perception, emotion, identity, belonging, trust, influence, and story. But we can learn to notice them, question them, regulate through them, and return to reality with more humility, clarity, and agency. Across this first series, the discernment field has mapped the forces that shape what people see, feel, believe, defend, repeat, trust, and become. The purpose has not been to make the listener suspicious of everything, but to help them become less unconsciously governed by anything. We have moved from perception into emotion, from emotion into thinking, from thinking into identity, from identity into the nervous system, from the nervous system into incentives and feedback, from feedback into influence architecture, from influence into status and attention, from attention into narrative, from narrative into morality, from morality into belonging, and from belonging into authority. Now the map is visible, and once the map is visible, the practice begins. This first series ends here, but the field does not end here. The field continues wherever perception meets pressure, wherever emotion meets meaning, wherever belonging meets conscience, wherever authority asks for trust, wherever attention is captured, wherever a story becomes sacred, wherever a group decides what can be said, wherever a system rewards one version of the self and punishes another. So the next movement of the discernment field will not abandon this map. It will take the map into more specific territories. The second series will move deeper into the lived arenas where discernment is tested in daily life. Media ecosystems, technological influence, artificial intelligence, education, health and wellness, family systems, relationships, institutional trust, spirituality, public fear, cultural conflict, digital identity, social engineering, and the new forms of reality making emerging around us. It will ask how the field changes when the screen becomes the environment, how trust changes when synthetic voices can imitate human presence, how discernment changes when education trains compliance or curiosity, how health becomes a battlefield between expertise, profit, fear, and personal experience, how family stories shape adult perception, how romantic and social relationships become fields of projection, attachment, power, and repair, how spirituality can awaken perception or become another authority structure, how public fear can be manufactured, amplified, resisted, or embodied, how culture turns conflict into identity, and how the human being can remain grounded as reality becomes increasingly mediated. But the core question will remain the same: what is shaping perception, and how do we return to clarity without losing our humanity? That will be the work of the second series, not a new doctrine, a deeper application. Because the field does not disappear when the episode ends. The field is where life happens. So as we leave this first series, consider one final question: what part of your perception feels most obvious, and what might be shaping it? And perhaps a second: where in your life are you ready to stop being governed unconsciously by a field you can now begin to see? Until next time, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to the Discernment Field, Episode 15, Integration, the Discernment Field, to live with clarity inside the field. I'm James Miller.